again. Moncharmin's last phrase so dearly expressed the suspicion in which he now held his partner that it was bound to cause a stormy explanation, at the end of which it was agreed that Richard should yield to all of Moncharmin's wishes, with the object of helping him to discover the miscreant who was victimizing him. This brings us to the interval after the garden act, with the strange conduct observed by Monsieur Remy, and those curious lapses from his dignity that might be expected of the managers. It was arranged between Richard and Moncharmin, first, that Richard should repeat the exact movements which he had made on the night of the disappearance of the first 20,000 francs, and second, that Moncharmin should not for an instant lose sight of Richard's coat-tail pocket, into which Madame Giry was to slip the 20,000 francs. Monsieur Richard went and placed himself at the identical spot where he had stood when he bowed to the Under-Secretary for Fine Arts. Monsieur Moncharmin, however, took up his position a few steps behind him. Madame Giry passed, rubbed up against Monsieur Richard, got rid of her 20,000 francs in the manager's coat-tail pocket, and disappeared, or rather she was conjured away. In accordance with the instructions received from Moncharmin a few minutes earlier, Monsieur took the good lady to the acting manager's office, and turned the key on her, thus making it impossible for her to communicate with her ghost. Meanwhile, Monsieur Richard was bending and bowing and scraping and walking backward, just as if he had had that high and mighty minister, the Under-Secretary for the Fine Arts, before him. Only though these marks of politeness would have created no astonishment if the Under-Secretary of State had really been in front of Monsieur Richard, they caused an easily comprehensible amazement to the spectators of this very natural but quite inexplicable scene when Monsieur Richard had nobody in front of him. Monsieur Richard bowed to nobody, and bent his back before nobody, and walked backward before nobody. And a few steps behind him, Monsieur Moncharmin did the same thing he was doing, in addition to pushing away Monsieur Remy and begging Monsieur de la Bordierie, the ambassador, and the manager of the Credit Central not to touch Monsieur le Directeur. Moncharmin, who had his own ideas, didn't want Richard to come to him presently, when the 20,000 francs were gone, and say, "Perhaps it was the ambassador, or the manager of the Credit Central, or Remy." The more so as, at the time of the first scene, as Richard himself admitted, Richard had met nobody in that part of the theatre, after Madame Giry had brushed up against him. Having begun by walking backward in order to bow, Richard continued to do so from prudence, until he reached the passage leading to the offices of the management. In this way he was constantly watched by Moncharmin from behind, and himself kept an eye on anyone approaching from the front. Once more, this novel method of walking behind the scenes, adopted by the managers of our National Academy of Music, attracted attention, but the managers themselves thought of nothing but their 20,000 francs. On reaching the half-dark passage, Richard said to Moncharmin in a low voice, "I'm sure that nobody's touched me. You would now better keep at some distance from me, and watch till I come to the door of the office. It's better not to arouse suspicion, and we can see anything that happens." But Moncharmin replied, "No, Richard, no. You walk ahead, and I'll walk immediately behind you. I won't leave you by a step." "But in that case," exclaimed Richard, "they'll never steal our 20,000 francs." "I should hope not, indeed." "Then what we're doing is absurd." "We're doing exactly what we did last time. Last time I followed you as you were leaving the stage, and followed close behind you down this passage." "That's true," sighed Richard, shaking his head and passively obeying Moncharmin. And 2 minutes later the joint managers had locked themselves into their office. Moncharmin himself put the key in his pocket. "We remained locked up like this last time until you left the opera to go home." "That's so. No one came and disturbed us, I suppose?" "No one." "Then," said Richard, who was trying to collect his memory, "then I certainly must have been robbed on my way home from the opera." "No," said Moncharmin in a drier tone than ever. "No, that's impossible, for I dropped you in my cab. The 20,000 francs disappeared at your place. There's no shadow of a doubt about that." "It's incredible," protested Richard. I'm sure of my servants, and if one of them had done it, he would have disappeared since. Moncharmin shrugged his shoulders as though to say he didn't wish to enter into details, and Richard began to think that Moncharmin was treating him in a very insupportable fashion. Moncharmin, I've had enough of this. Richard, I've had too much of it. You dare to suspect me? Yes, of a silly joke. One doesn't just joke with 20,000 francs. That's what I think, declared Moncharmin, unfolding a newspaper and ostentatiously studying its contents. What are you doing? Are you going to read the paper next? Yes, Richard, until I take you home. Like last time? Yes, like last time. Richard snatched up the paper from Moncharmin's hands, and Moncharmin stood up, more irritated than ever, and found himself faced by an exasperated Richard, who, crossing his arms on his chest, said, Look here, I'm thinking of this. I'm thinking of what I might think if, like last time, after spending the evening alone with you, you brought me home, and if at the moment of parting I perceived the 20,000 francs had disappeared from my coat pocket like last time. And what might you think? Asked Moncharmin, crimson with rage. I might think that, as you hadn't left me by a foot's breadth, and as by your own wish, you were the only one to approach me like last time, I might think that if the 20,000 francs was no longer in my pocket, it stood a very good chance of being in yours. Moncharmin leapt up at the suggestion. Oh, a safety pin. What do you want a safety pin for? To fasten you up with a safety pin, You want to fasten me with a safety pin? Yes, to fasten you to the 20,000 francs. Then whether it's here, on the drive from here to your place, or at your place, you'll feel the hand that pulls at your pocket, and you'll see if it's mine. Oh, so you're suspecting me now, are you? A safety pin! And that was the moment when Moncharmin opened the door in the passage and shouted, A safety pin! Somebody give me a safety pin! And we also know how, at the same moment, Remy, who had no safety pin, was received by Moncharmin, while the boy procured the pin so eagerly longed for. And what happened was this. Moncharmin first locked the door again, and then he knelt down behind Richard's back. I hope that the notes are still there. So do I. The real ones? Asked Moncharmin, resolved not to be had this time. Look for yourself. I refuse to touch them. Moncharmin took the envelope from Richard's pocket and drew out the banknotes with a trembling hand. For this time, in order frequently to make sure of the presence of the notes, he had not sealed the envelope nor even fastened it. He felt reassured on finding they were all there and quite genuine. He put them back in the tail pocket and pinned them with great care, and then he sat down behind Richard's coat-tails and kept his eyes fixed on them, while Richard, sitting at his writing-table, didn't stir. "A little patience, Richard," said Moncharmin. "We have only a few minutes to wait. The clock will soon strike 12, and last time we left at the last stroke of 12. I shall have all the patience necessary." The time passed, slow, heavy, mysterious, stifling. Richard tried to laugh. "I should end by believing in the omnipotence of the ghost. Just now, don't you find something uncomfortable, disquieting, alarming in the atmosphere of the room?" "You're quite right," said Moncharmin, who was really impressed. "The ghost," continued Richard, in a low voice, as though fearing lest he should be overheard by invisible ears. "A ghost. Suppose all the same it were a ghost who puts the magic envelopes on the table, who talks in box 5, who killed Joseph Bouquet, who unhooked the chandelier, and who robs us. For after all, there's no one here except you and me. And if the notes disappear, neither you nor I have anything to do with it, well, we shall have to believe in the ghost. In the ghost." And at that moment, the clock on the mantelpiece gave its warning click, and the first stroke of 12 struck. The two managers shuddered, the perspiration streaming from their foreheads. The 12th stroke sounded strangely in their ears, and when the clock stopped they gave a sigh, and rose from their chairs. "I think we can go now." "I think so." "Before we go, do you mind if I look in your pocket?" "But of course, Moncharmin, you must." "Well?" he asked, as Moncharmin was feeling at the pocket. "Well, I can feel the pin." Of course, as you said, we can't be robbed without noticing it. But Moncharmin, whose hands were still fumbling, bellowed, I can feel the pin, but I can't feel the notes. Come now, no joking, Moncharmin. This isn't the time for it. Well, feel for yourself. And so Richard tore off his coat. The two managers turned the pocket inside out, and found that the pocket was empty. And the curious thing was that the pin remained, stuck in the same place. Richard and Moncharmin turned pale. There was no longer any doubt about the witchcraft. The ghost, muttered Moncharmin, but Richard suddenly sprang upon his partner. No one but you has touched my pocket. Give me back my 20,000 francs. Give them back to me. On my soul, sighed Moncharmin, who was ready to swoon. On my soul, I swear I haven't got it. And then somebody knocked at the door. Moncharmin opened it automatically, seemed hardly to recognize Mercier, his business manager, exchanged a few words with him without knowing what he was saying, and with an unconscious movement put the safety pin, for which he had no further use, into the hands of his bewildered subordinate. Chapter 18. The Commissary, the Viscount, and the Persian. The first words of the Commissary of Police on entering the manager's office were to ask after the missing prima donna. Is Christine Daae here? Christine Daae? Here? Echoed Richard. No, why? As for Moncharmin, he had not the strength left to utter a word. Richard repeated for the commissary, and the compact crowd which had followed him into the office observed an impressive silence. Why do you ask if Christine Daae is here, Monsieur le Commissaire? Because she has to be found, declared the commissary of police solemnly. What do you mean she has to be found? Has she disappeared? In the middle of the performance. In the middle of the performance? This is extraordinary. Isn't it? And what is quite as extraordinary is that you should first learn it from me. Yes, said Richard, taking his head in his hands and muttering, Oh, what is this new business? Oh, it's enough to make a man send in his resignation. And he pulled a few hairs out of his mustache without even knowing what he was doing. So she disappeared in the middle of the performance? Yes, she was carried off in the prison act at the moment when she was invoking the aid of the angels, but I doubt she was carried off by an angel. But I'm sure that she was. Wait, no. And I'm sure that she was. Everyone looked around, and a young man, pale and trembling with excitement, repeated, I'm sure of it. Sure of what? Asked Mifroid. That Christine Daae was carried off by an angel, Monsieur le Commissaire, and I can tell you his name. Oh, Monsieur the Viscount de Chauny. So you maintain that Christine Daae was carried off by an angel of the opera, no doubt. Yes, monsieur, by an angel of the opera, and I'll tell you where he lives when we are alone. You are right, monsieur. And the commissary of police, inviting Raoul to take a chair, cleared the room of all the rest, excepting the managers. And then Raoul spoke. Monsieur de la Commissaire, the angel is called Eric. He lives in the opera, and he's the angel of music. The angel of music? Really? That's very curious. The angel of music, And turning to the managers, Monsieur Mifroid asked, Have you an angel of music on the premises, gentlemen? Richard and Moncharmin shook their heads without even speaking. Oh, said the Viscount, those gentlemen have heard of the opera ghost. Well, I'm in a position to state that the opera ghost and the angel of music are one and the same person, and his real name is Eric. Monsieur Mifroid rose and looked at Raoul attentively. I beg your pardon, monsieur. Beg y'all's pardon. That voice didn't come out right. Let's try that again. I beg your pardon, monsieur, but is it your intention to make fun of the law? And if not, what is all this about the opera ghost? I say that these gentlemen have heard of them. Gentlemen, it appears that you know the opera ghost. And Richard rose with remaining hairs of his mustache in hand. No, Monsieur Commissary, no. We don't know him, but we wish that we did, for this very evening he's robbed us of 20,000 francs. And Richard turned a terrible look on Moncharmin, which seemed to say, "Give back the 20,000 francs, or I'll tell the whole story." Moncharmin understood what he meant, for with a distracted gesture he said, "I will tell everything and have done with it." As for Miss Freud, he looked at the managers and at Raoul by turns, and wondered whether he'd strayed into a lunatic's asylum. He passed his hand through his hair. A ghost who, on the same evening, carries off an opera singer and steals 20,000 francs, is a ghost who must have his hands very full. If you don't mind, we'll take the questions in order. The singer first, the 20,000 francs after. Come, Monsieur de Charnier, let's try to talk seriously. You believe that Mademoiselle Christine Daae has been carried off by an individual named Eric. Do you know this person? Have you seen him?
Yes.
Where?
In a churchyard.
Monsieur Mifroid gave a start, began to scrutinize Raoul again, and said, "Of course, that's where ghosts usually hang out. And what were you doing in that churchyard?"
Monsieur, I can quite understand how absurd my replies must seem to you, but I beg you to believe that I am in full possession of my faculties. The safety of the person dearest to me in the world is at stake. I should like to convince you in a few words, for time is pressing, and every minute is valuable. Unfortunately, if I do not tell you the strangest story that ever was from the beginning, you will not believe me. I will tell you all I know about the opera ghost, Monsieur Commissary, but alas, I know not much."
"Never mind, go on," exclaimed Richard and Moncharmin, suddenly greatly interested. Unfortunately for their hopes of learning some detail that could put them on the track of their hoaxer, they were soon compelled to accept the fact that Monsieur Raoul de Charnier had completely lost his head. All that story about Perros, Guerrier, death's heads, and enchanted violins could have only taken birth in the disordered brain of a youth mad with love. It was evident also that Monsieur Commissary Mifroid shared their view, and the magistrate would have certainly cut short of the incoherent narrative if circumstances had not taken upon themselves to interrupt it. The door opened and a man entered, curiously dressed in an enormous frock coat and a tall hat, at once shabby and shiny, that came down to his ears. He went up to the commissary and spoke to him in a whisper. It was doubtless a detective come to deliver an important communication. And during this conversation, Monsieur Mifroid did not take his eyes off Raoul. At last, addressing him, he said,
"Monsieur, we've talked enough about the ghost. We will talk now about yourself a little, if you have no objection. You were to carry off Mademoiselle Christine Daae tonight."
"Yes, Monsieur le Commissaire."
"After the performance?"
"Yes, Monsieur le Commissaire."
"All your arrangements were made?"
"Yes, Monsieur le Commissaire."
"The carriage that brought you was to take you both away. There were fresh horses in readiness at every stage."
"That's true, Monsieur le Commissaire."
"And nevertheless your carriage is still outside the rotunda waiting your orders, is it not?"
"Yes, Monsieur le Commissaire."
"Did you know that there were 3 other carriages there in addition to yours?"
"I didn't pay the least attention."
"They were the carriages of Mademoiselle Sorelli, who could not find room in the Cour de l'Administration, of Carlotta, and of your brother, Monsieur de la Comte de Charnier."
"Very likely."
"What is certain is that though your carriage and Sorelli's and Carlotta's are still there by the rotunda pavement, your older brother's carriage is gone."
"This has nothing to say to—"
"I beg your pardon. Was not Monsieur de la Comte opposed to your marriage with Mademoiselle Daae?"
"That is a matter that concerns only my family."
"You've answered my question. He was opposed to it. And that is why you were carrying Christine Daae out of your brother's reach. Well, Monsieur de Charnier, allow me to inform you that your brother has been smarter than you. It is he who has carried off Christine Daae."
"Oh, impossible!"
groaned Raoul, pressing his hand to his heart.
"Are you sure?"
"Immediately after the artist's disappearance, which was procured by means which we still have to ascertain, He flung into his carriage, which drove right across Paris at a furious pace.
Across Paris?
Asked poor Raoul in a hoarse voice.
What do you mean by across Paris?
Across Paris and out of Paris, by the Brussels road.
Oh, I shall catch them,
cried the young man, and he rushed out of the office.
And bring her back to us, cried the commissary, gaily. That's a trick worth 2 of the angel musics.
And turning to his audience, Monsieur Mifroid delivered a little lecture on police methods.
I don't know for a moment whether Monsieur de la Count de Chauny has really carried off Christine Daae or not, but I want to know and believe that at this moment no one is more anxious to inform us than his brother, and now he is off flying in pursuit of him. He's my chief